Hello. I want to talk a bit about the Pride events. Just generically, if you don't know what this is, I mean, they're well publicized, but if you don't know what this is, it's basically a festival, a parade, organized to support LGBT rights, lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual rights, and freedom, and from what I gather, a sense of expression and being confident in who you are and so on. Now, I've never attended a Pride event. I have to be candid about that. I've never attended a Pride event. Not because I don't want to, simply because I haven't had the opportunity. It's something I would definitely consider in the future. Although I have witnessed them from the sidelines when I've been going to um another event. Um, I want to talk a bit about what I feel is forced conformity about Pride. And I would ask that if you want to disagree with me or challenge me on any of my points, that's absolutely fine. But I would ask that you bear with me and listen to everything I have to say, because very often people can jump to a conclusion based on something someone has said without realizing the full context. I would ask you to bear with me. Now it's a little bit dry. Okay, so I'm partly referring here to a Pride event in Istanbul in Turkey, which was broken up at the weekend, um, as well as general Pride events. Now, the situation in Turkey was controversial because this is it's not new in Istanbul. Istanbul is a very cosmopolitan city, and from what I gather, Pride events have been going on there for a while. But it's no mystery that Recep Tayyip Erdogan, his government has been increasingly conservative and increasingly Islamized. I wouldn't go so far as to call Turkey a theocracy yet, but there's definitely been a trend in that direction. In a way, this event coincides with Ramadan. Um, so there are people who say that it's inappropriate to have it at this time. Although this has been held in Istanbul before. Um, I have to say, on the surface, I would ask this question: if the organizers know this is a month of Ramadan, then why not just compromise and have it at a different time of the year? Um, because I mean, a lot of the people replying to that were saying that they support the police taking action, and there was some ugly scenes of tear gas being used and so on. You know, I've mixed views on this because, on one hand, I fully support basic human rights for lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual people, insofar as equal legal rights, insofar as legislation combating hate crime. And I absolutely support the right for any gay man or lesbian woman or transgender person to feel that they can live in freedom and not in fear. But I do feel that pride has long been politicized and long been used, certainly in Western countries. I do feel it is kind of, there's a situation whereby you either have to slavishly agree with it 100%, or you're basically demonized as a hateful homophobe. And I do have a problem with that. Um, on the general issue of pride, I understand that it is about gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual people expressing their pride in themselves, hence the name. And I do understand that context in the sense that for many decades they did suffer not only discrimination, but in the case of Britain, it was illegal until 1967 to be gay. So I do understand the context. And I think from that point of view, I have no problem with the event at all. I also think from a practical point of view, it is good for a city's economy. You know, it's a festival, and like any festival, it generates money. You know, you get people buying drinks, buying food. So I think it is good from an economic perspective. Um, But I do wonder why so many Pride events, there's a significant portion of people taking part feel they need to be sexually explicit. I mean, I just don't get how replicating a sexual act um, so, somehow is an expression of supporting gay rights. I just don't get that. If it was a case of celebrating the fact that you are what you are, and advocating, for example, an end of violence against gay people in Uganda, that's great, wonderful. But I think that the sexual innuendo only sort of gives real homophobes something to work with. But not just homophobes. I think that people who actually support gay rights, it's a bit like I would kind of compare this to feminism in the sense that I fully support women's rights, but I have a problem with some of the things that feminists do. Likewise, I fully support gay rights, but I just don't see why it needs to be so sexually explicit. I mean, I don't want to see two men, replicating themselves fucking in the street, to be quite frank. And I'm sure a gay man wouldn't feel particularly comfortable seeing a heterosexual couple insinuating a sex act. So I think there's double standards here. I mean, really, if you have a heterosexual couple, and let's say they dress up in bondage in a public street in daylight, there's a very strong chance they will be arrested for public indecency. Okay? In fact, there was a legal case, I believe it was either Paris or London, I can't remember, but there was a case where a group of people performing bondage might have even been somewhere in China. Anyway, it was a major city somewhere in the world, and the situation there was that it was illegal because it was considered public indecency. And then there's the issue of the naked rambler. He's a man, forget the guy's name, but he's got a lot of attention by insisting on his right to be nude, and he's been threatened with jail for his publicity stunts in order to bring attention to his cause. Now, I just have a problem with the forced conformity of pride, in the sense that either you slavishly support it or you're denounced as a hateful homophobe. And whilst obviously people accused of homophobia are not going to face violence or anything like that, they do face risking, they do face losing their job, especially in the case of politicians. And I that makes me uneasy because for me it's a freedom of speech issue. Um, I mean, in many parts of the world, gay people face genuine discrimination and violence and so on. There was a pride event in Kiev recently, and I think it was Kiev, it may have been Donetsk, it was a Ukrainian city, and there's some very ugly scenes where participants were beaten up by thugs. Now that's awful. No one should have to go through that. But in many liberal Western democracies, it's basically you have to accept this, and if you don't, you're a horrible homophobe. Um, you see, the thing is, I don't have a problem with the event itself, but I do have a problem with the explicit sexuality of it. And I think I might have mentioned this in a previous video. I just don't think it's necessary, especially in a public situation when there's children around. I mean, to me, that's something that is, call me old-fashioned, but I think it's something that should be around in nightclubs at nighttime. It's just not. If I had a young son or daughter, frankly, I wouldn't want them to be seeing any adults, whether gay or straight, to be replicating a sexual act in public. I just don't think it's appropriate. And I believe in Western countries, we've got to a situation now where, like, if anybody questions this, they're immediately denounced as a prude or a homophobe or a dinosaur. And I just think that I do think it's an issue about values here. It's not homophobia, it's about general values to do with what is appropriate and what isn't. Now, to those people who are against pride because because they have homophobic views, I I absolutely don't endorse their position. So I don't have a problem with pride in itself, but I do have a problem with the idea that anybody that in Western societies it is forced conformity. It is. We can't escape that. It is forced conformity. Either you completely agree with it or you're denounced as a horrible bigot. and that sort of political correctness, frankly, pisses me off. Um, okay, granted, they're not forcing people to watch the event, but it takes place in city centres. It's a very public event, and it's intended to get attention. So in that sense, it is being imposed, actually. Um, I don't know how people are going to respond to this video. I suspect that some people will agree with me, and some people will try to say that I'm a homophobe. To me, homophobia is one of those smears that really gets thrown around a lot, a bit like sexism, racism. And it's a very loaded word because as soon as you're tied to it, no matter what you say, no matter how much you try to back up your position, you're immediately denounced and vilified forever. Now, Andy Burnham, who's running to be leader of the Labour Party, has already been accused of being inconsistent in his record with gay rights simply because he said that he believes all children should have a father figure. And it was the issue about apparently he'd opposed a lesbian couple from adopting, something along those lines. So he'd been accused of being inconsistent in his gay rights record. But just like all Labour leaders, all Labour leadership candidates, he has to go out of his way to show that he's for LGBT rights. And of course, he's put the rainbow thing over his Facebook profile. Now, if that's his genuine opinion, fair enough. But I do feel that we are getting to a point in Western countries where, whilst, for example, there is a legitimate issue about equality, for example, the whole gay marriage debate, there's another side. I don't believe, for example, pride is a human right. I don't believe that it's any more of a human right than if a straight couple was to demand that they be allowed to replicate a sexual act in public. I mean, a young couple in Hong Kong was recently arrested. And Hong Kong's a lot more liberal than the rest of China for having sex in the street. So why is that wrong? And yet, two gay men or lesbian women can replicate a sex act in public, and it's fine. It's tolerance. I just have a problem with the double standards. There is blatant double standards here, and no one is talking about it. Now, if I was a public figure, no doubt there would be phone calls to, oh, have that Nathan Hazlitt taken off air, petition to sack him, etc. We're getting to a point in Western society where we're so politically correct and so super sensitive that anybody who says anything controversial is immediately demonized as a horrible bigot. And frankly, I am sick and tired of the political left doing this. I'm sick and tired of them preaching and pontificating about tolerance, and yet they're actually extremely intolerant to dissenting views. On the wider issue of gay rights, um, my record should be clear. I made a video talking about homophobia in Africa, announcing that. So I don't want people to confuse me with someone who is genuinely homophobic because I'm really not. I have a very close friend who's gay, and I don't care if people say, "Oh, you're just saying that." It's a fact. I do. It's just a fact. In fact, I wish he was here so we could. I don't even know if he would agree with me on these points. Maybe he would disagree. But we've been friends for years, and we have very, we talk every day, etc. Um, but to me, it's just a double standards. So if we're going to say, "Oh, well, city councils have to accept pride," if any council that doesn't, then he or she is a horrible homophobe. Um, well, then by the same token, then we have to allow straight couples to, for example, go around in bondage or go around replicating a sexual act. I really see no difference. So if we're going to say that pride events are morally okay, then you have to say that the same logic applies to straight couples. And no one seems to be talking about the fact that it isn't, actually. Also, there's another dynamic to pride. If the whole point is to be about showing, you're proud of who you are and you're not going to be bullied by homophobes and this sort of thing, that's great. But surely all it's doing in that sense is showing that there's difference. It's kind of, I mean, the title is pride, but surely it's also kind of saying that there's an exceptionalism in here. And it actually does the opposite of trying to show that gay men and lesbian women are just normal people and they're born as gay or lesbian women. Surely the thing about pride events is it is marginalizing people by, in the same way that Black History Month does that. Um, I'm well aware that the things I'm saying here are very politically incorrect, but fuck it. I'm just stating my views. There might come a time in the future when I reflect on this and I think, well, I was wrong. Maybe I misinterpreted something, or um, this is just the way I feel about it. And I'm aware actually that there are gay men who don't like Pride for precisely the reasons I've spoken about. Because the whole thing, for example, about the sexuality, all it does is then to negative stereotype that gay men are promiscuous and overtly sexualized. Some straight men are as well. And straight men are dismissed as womanizers, as perverts, etc. What's the difference? What is the difference? So just sharing my views. I'm not against Pride as an event. I think it can be good for a city's economy. I have no problem with it as a celebration. But the fundamental thing I'm questioning here is the sexual aspect. I just don't see, and it is quite explicit, but I just don't see the necessity of that. As for the situation in Istanbul, I would have a problem if the Turkish authorities wanted to ban it completely, but I don't see why there can't be a compromise. Why the organisers insist it has to be in Ramadan. I mean, Pride is a much, much, much more recent event than Ramadan. So surely, Ramadan can't just change the date. It falls at a certain time. But Pride can change the date. So why can't the organisers negotiate and just say, well, look, let's allow us to have this at a different time? It sounds almost like they're trying to be provocative. I don't know. I might be wrong about that. If you're in Turkey, let me know. Um, and by the way, this is not an advocation of Islamism. People should know by now my thoughts on Islamism. I abhor it. But on this occasion, I think it's just, I don't see why it needs to be the same time as a festival when people are fasting, when they are, making the commitment to make that sacrifice. And it almost sounds like it's rubbing it into me.